What's happening in my brain right now? Is it a nerve cell firing? Or did multiple things happen at the same time? So where do my consciousness and feelings come from? Is what happens in my brain just electrical signals? But computers do the same thing. If everything is just this, then what separates me from a machine? Or is it beyond the laws of physics? Is there a much different mechanism? Could the answer to all these questions be hidden in the quantum world?
Some scientists say that what we call consciousness is made up of electrical signals in our brain. Another group of scientists naturally asks this question. If the source of consciousness is electrical activity, then why aren't computers conscious? The other group says this. There aren't just electrical processes in our brain. There are also chemical activities. Perhaps consciousness arises as a result of those activities. Who knows? Another group says don't bother at all. They say the source of consciousness cannot be solved. But there is another group of scientists. They think that something so mysterious can only be solved by another great mystery, with quantum physics. On one side, the strangeness and unknowns of the subatomic world. On the other, the inexplicable nature of consciousness. Can these come together? Can a known emerge from two unknowns? Could our brain be operating under the laws of the quantum world? Recent research shows that we are much closer to answering these questions than ever before. There is a particularly recent study that truly, it seems likely to significantly dispel doubts about this theory. Now, I will explain both that research and why the scientific community approaches this theory with caution. But first, we need to understand the human brain. Of course, to the extent of what we know so far. Because what we don't know about the structure of the brain far exceeds what we do know. Our brain operates with signals, much like a computer. 86 billion neurons are constantly communicating with each other. The brain and the computer. Both are physical, visible structures, and both can process information. While our brain does this through neurons, computers use processors. Computers have a very simple principle. Zeros and ones. You can think of it like a light switch. When the switch is off, there is no electricity. This state is considered zero. When the switch is on, there is electricity, which means 1. This is how computers perform all operations using 0 and 1 signals. A letter on the computer, a frame of a photo, even this video you are watching consists of billions of ones and zeros. The neurons in our brain are similarly triggered by electrical impulses. In other words, they communicate by sending signals to each other. However, unlike computers, there is also a chemical process in our brain. Even though a neuron generates an electrical signal within itself, it cannot connect directly to other neurons. There are special communication regions between them called synapses. When the electrical signal reaches the synapses, it transforms into a chemical signal. After this signal stimulates the other neuron, it converts back into an electrical signal and continues on its way. However, such a process does not exist in computers. Two processor units communicate data directly with each other. In other words, they operate solely with electrical signals. So how do physical processes transform into unique experiences? That is, how do abstract things emerge from such a physical structure? Answering this question is quite difficult. In fact, it's so difficult that the Australian philosopher David Chalmers named it the hard problem of consciousness in 1995. Why doesn't our brain just settle for processing information? Chalmers asked. How and why do those pieces of information transform into a conscious experience? Today, we can explain how the brain works up to a certain point. For example, the light that enters our eyes falls onto the retina. The brain processes this data and creates an image. But there is something we cannot explain. The feeling that arises after seeing the image. For example, when we see a red color, first our eyes perceive this light. It sends it to our brain through nerve signals. But why does it feel like red? If we attach a camera to a computer, can't it perceive red? It can perceive it, but it cannot feel it as red. It can only perceive it as being at a certain wavelength. In other words, nothing resulting from physical processes can explain consciousness. The problem is difficult, but it's not impossible. There is still hope. Maybe to solve this, we need to turn our eyes towards a different world. The quantum world as well. It also has unknowns, just like consciousness. It operates very differently from the laws of classical physics. Just as consciousness has the hard problem, quantum mechanics has the measurement problem. In classical physics, it's easy to measure where something is or how it moves. An object is either here or there. But in the quantum world, the situation is very different. A particle remains in superposition until a measurement is made. So, it can exist in many different states at the same time. But when we measure it, we only get a single result. Now, I have a proton and an electron in my hand. Of course, these are not normally this large. They are structures that cannot be seen with the naked eye. Electrons do not orbit around the proton, according to the known laws of physics. So it's not like the Earth's orbit around the Sun. They do not move in a fixed orbit. Therefore, an electron can be in many places at once. It moves just like a wave. It only appears at a single point when we make a measurement. In quantum terms, it collapses to a single position. Our brain is constantly weighing probabilities. Let's say we need to choose between coffee or tea. Before the choice, our subconscious evaluates many factors simultaneously. There are many factors like our current mood, our need for caffeine, and our habits. But in the end, we make a single conscious choice. We either choose coffee or tea. So, our conscious moment collapses into one of the options, just like a quantum measurement. Now let me introduce you to two important scientists trying to prove this theory. One is the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Roger Penrose, whom I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The other is neuroscientist and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. If you noticed, one is a physicist, the other is a neuroscientist. These titles are not coincidental. One studies the rules of classical and quantum physics, while the other examines the internal structure of the brain. These two scientists thought there might be a connection between quantum physics and the brain. And in 1996, they developed a theory like this: Orchestrated Objective Reduction. The name might seem a bit complex, but it actually has a meaning. The term orchestrated indicates that the process of consciousness occurs not randomly, but in a specific order. In other words, just as musicians in a symphony move in harmony together, certain processes in the brain operate in an orderly manner. Objective reduction refers to the reduction of superposition in quantum physics to a single state. That is the collapse of probabilities in a quantum system into a single outcome. Penrose and Hameroff believe that consciousness also arises from this type of collapse within cellular structures called microtubules. Microtubules are found inside brain cells, namely neurons. It may sound like a very theoretical term, but it's actually quite simple. Micro, as you know, means small. The word tubule derives from the Latin word tubulus, which means tube. Therefore, microtubule, means small tube. Indeed, these structures are hollow, like a cylindrical tube. They resemble a straw or thin pasta. But don't be fooled by their simple appearance. They have very critical functions for the brain. They transport the necessary materials within the cell. At the same time, they maintain the shape of the cell. They also play a role in the transmission of nerve signals. You can think of them as hidden highways inside our cells. Just as cars, people, and goods are transported via roads in a city, microtubules transport molecules, nutrients, and even signals within the cell. According to Penrose and Hameroff, the functions of microtubules may not be limited to these. They might function like quantum processors that process information in our brains. Because for quantum effects to emerge, a certain order is necessary. Microtubules are not randomly distributed within the cell. They are not such structures. They are parts of a highly orderly and organized system. Remember, we gave the example of roads. In cities, roads are constructed according to a certain order, isn't that right? Microtubules also extend in specific directions within the cell, forming a transport and communication system. This orderly lattice structure suggests that their function is not only for transport. It also indicates that they might be important for information processing. Inside the microtubules, there are proteins called tubulin. These may contain small-scale building blocks that can enter into superposition and quantum entanglement. These structures might be entangled with each other. Quantum entanglement means that two particles are instantly connected with each other, no matter how far apart they are. It is thought that the structures inside the microtubules could also provide instant connections over long distances throughout the brain. So why is there such a possibility? Because conscious experience is felt as a whole. For example, let's think about watching a football match. While we follow the ball with our eyes, we also hear the sound of the crowd. Our brain normally processes different senses at different speeds. The speed of signals between the visual cortex and the auditory cortex is different, but we don't feel any delay. If there is a process like quantum entanglement in our brain, this could allow different regions of the brain to be instantly connected. So what allows us to experience conscious experience as a whole is quantum. One of the two scientists deeply focused on the quantum consciousness connection is an anesthesiologist, Stuart Hameroff. I introduced him to you before. In 1987, Hameroff made a claim. He says, anesthetic substances do not affect the synapses, the connection points of neurons in the brain, as we thought. They affect microtubules. Of course, the scientific community strongly opposes this, because according to the traditional theory, anesthetic drugs affect synapses. However, there is an unanswered question here. Why does consciousness shut down even though the brain is still functioning? Wasn't consciousness composed of electrical signals? That's what the traditional theory said. But despite anesthesia, electrical activity in the brain continues. This is the critical point, exactly here. Hameroff suggests that anesthetic drugs bind to microtubules and shut down consciousness in this way. And he says if classical physics cannot explain how consciousness is formed, then there might be a different mechanism. Perhaps consciousness is formed in microtubules through quantum laws. Look, I especially want to draw your attention to the date. Hameroff said this in 1987. Now let's pocket this information, because soon I will talk about the research I hinted at the beginning of the video. When Hameroff said this, of course, it caused quite a stir. This idea was found to be highly speculative in the scientific community. In fact, look at the criticism brought by the Canadian philosopher Patricia Churchland in this sarcastic tone. Explaining the connection between quantum mechanics and consciousness is as meaningless as saying consciousness is created with fairy dust, says Churchland. What do you mean, fairy dust? Particle physicist Victor Stenger goes much further. This is not science at all. It's a superstition that should be shelved alongside dragons. I know these sarcastic tones can be disturbing, but there is a reason why the criticisms are so harsh. The environment in the brain is quite challenging for quantum processes. In fact, according to the predominant scientific view, it's almost impossible, because the brain is hot, wet, and noisy. Quantum effects cannot survive in such an environment. For example, quantum computers operate at temperatures close to absolute zero. That means an environment as cold as -273 degrees Celsius is required. Additionally, it must be completely isolated from environmental effects. The temperature of our brain is 37 degrees Celsius. Nerve cells are constantly exchanging ions. Moreover, many chemical reactions are taking place, and everything is in motion. This is like the reflection we see on a calm sea disappearing when a wave appears. In the processes in the brain, these waves disrupt quantum effects. Or rather, they are supposed to disrupt them. However, new research in science can sometimes even change fundamental ideas. In 2024, that is just last year, a study caused a great stir in the scientific world. It led to some questions being asked again. A group of researchers from Wellesley University in America conducted an experiment on mice to understand how anesthesia shuts down consciousness. The mice were given a drug that temporarily affected the functioning of microtubules. The aim was to see how the anesthesia process changed if the microtubules were affected. Do you know what the result was? It took longer for the mice given the drug to lose consciousness. This experiment shows that anesthesia targets microtubules instead of synapses. So, anesthesia shuts down consciousness by interacting with microtubules, not synapses. Therefore, consciousness might be formed within microtubules, not through synapses as we thought. Of course, this study did not completely eliminate doubts, but it caused quite a bit of confusion. Previously, only a handful of scientists like Penrose and Hameroff were asking this question. Now, many people in the scientific community are asking the same question. Does our brain operate according to the laws of the quantum world? We still don't know the answer to this question completely. However, quantum effects have been observed in some creatures in nature. For example, plants. Scientists were having difficulty explaining the photosynthesis process of plants with the laws of classical physics, until an experiment conducted in 2007. A group of researchers from the University of California and the University of Washington reached the following conclusion in their experiment. When plants receive sunlight, instead of sending electrons through a single path, they use superposition to try many different paths simultaneously. This way, the electron discovers the fastest and most efficient route at the same time and reaches the reaction center in the shortest time. Thus, plants use light energy with almost zero energy loss. This research is one of the first pieces of evidence showing that biological systems can use quantum mechanics. So how do migratory birds fly thousands of kilometers without losing their way? Have we ever thought about it? Do they use a map? Do they look at the sun? Yes, the sun and stars help birds find their way. But this alone is not enough. Scientists believe that birds determine their direction by sensing the Earth's magnetic field. However, the Earth's magnetic field is very weak. To detect this, birds need to have a super sense. Birds have special proteins in their eyes called cryptochromes. These proteins become activated when they receive light. Electrons with quantum effects are formed inside them. These electrons remain connected through quantum entanglement. In other words, the Earth's magnetic field affects these pairs of electrons, and it changes their spin directions. When the electrons change direction under the influence of the magnetic field, the bird's nervous system can detect this change, and they also change direction. Thus, they never lose their course. Now I ask you, if there are quantum effects in birds and plants, why not in the human brain? Moreover, we are the only beings capable of questioning our existence. We can ask ourselves this question: who am I? But who is asking this question? Have you ever thought about it? Quantum mechanics has shown us that the state of a particle only becomes clear when it is observed. In other words, reality is shaped by observation. If similar processes are operating in our brain, then who is the real observer? The biological processes in our brain, or a more fundamental awareness, independent of them? There is no definite answer to these questions. But if our consciousness is a part of the quantum world, perhaps it will never be lost. Maybe it will continue to exist forever within this observing infinite universe.